Map pin to aftermath. A gray dawn over the Bashi Channel, 20 miles south of Yami Island. 23rd of October, 1943. By noon, Imperial convoy doctrine no longer worked. The reason fit inside a steel pressure hull and an HF/voice handset shared by 3 boats that refused to fight alone. Subscribe. New investigations every day. The weather held low and fast. A northeast monsoon line pushing broken cumulus over the Luzon Strait on the 23rd of October, 1943. Sea state ran to short crests and whitecaps, good cover for periscope wakes, and better for black silhouettes running decks awash. On that morning, a 3-submarine coordinated attack group under Captain Charles B., 3-submarine Swede Momsen, shaped in from the Pacific side. USS Cerro as control boat, with grayback and shad sliding wide to port and starboard. Their plot put an eastbound Japanese convoy, oilers, transports, and 2 Kaiboken escorts, crossing the seam between the Bashi Channel and the Balintang Channel, a corridor Imperial planners considered manageable with single-axis threats. The old rule assumed submarines hunted alone and struck in sequence. By midday, that assumption failed. The break showed first on the Cerro's SJ radar, its PPI scope measuring a convoy front spread across roughly 4 nautical miles, with columns spaced by less than 1,000 yards. The control boat did not close to fire. 1,000 yards. Instead, it held station outside escort sonar cones and used HF/voice to push bearings and speed gates to the flank boats. The strike metric looked clinical on paper. Attack runs staggered by minutes, not hours. Torpedo salvos set shallow for laden tankers. Approach angles crossing from opposite bows to force contradictory zigzags. Where a single submarine once created a single problem, 3 created a geometry that convoy doctrine could not answer without tearing its own screen apart. A witness object preserved the moment the rule broke. On a faded unit after action report page from Shad, the plotter's grease pencil shows 2 dashed arcs converging on a lead oiler, time marks at 3-minute intervals, converging on a lead. The annotation, positions, gyro angles, track spacing, records a tactic designed to overload the helm orders of protection escorts. When Shad loosed a spread from the northwest and Grayback rolled in from the southeast on a night surface run, the escorts split, each chasing a different surface contact painted by their own Type 92 search sets, and losing the 3rd submarine that trailed the convoy's wake. Within minutes, wakes, smoke, and emergency turns collapsed the convoy into a disorder the escorts could not untangle. Turns collapsed the human lever who authorized this departure from custom sat thousands of miles away at Pearl Harbor. Vice Admiral Charles Lockwood, Commander Submarines, Pacific Fleet, in late summer, after a year correcting torpedo reliability and depth keeping, he signed the operations order that created coordinated attack groups, with a designated tactical commander riding one of the boats. That signature moved authority for real-time control from shore plotting rooms to a skipper with a voice circuit and a radar scope at the scene. The order also codified a tempo metric. No independent stalking if a pack contact existed. Attack cycles measured by the time it took escorts to commit to a wrong vector. Attack cycles measured. The change was doctrinal, not technological, but it hinged on 2 devices the Imperial Navy had not yet mapped into their playbook. Reliable surface search radar that worked in monsoon chop and voice coordination that kept 3 boats on one problem, without betraying position with long transmissions. The next witness object lay in a ship's logline torn from a Japanese oiler, later recovered in a Manila warehouse. The entries for the 4th watch record, dark shapes, port and starboard, and zigzag plan 5 canceled, followed by a simple note that the escort on the convoy's beam made flank speed away from the convoy track to chase a radar return that slipped. Speed away from the comfort scope. Between those lines sits the effect of the pack. A defense plan optimized to frustrate a lone submarine became a set of contradictory maneuvers under cross-axis attack. A third piece of evidence, the decoded signal summary from Station Hypo for the week, lists convoy assembly notices from Moji to Takao and onward to Mako. The summary does not predict the exact contact off Yami, but it shows traffic density and routing habits that enabled Momsen's group to choose a seam where convoys compressed into the strait to avoid aircraft range from Mindoro and weather off Cape. avoid aircraft engaño. The Wolfpack did not rely on luck. It relied on predictable flows meeting a new kind of pressure. Tactically, the numbers turned inside out. Conventional convoy spacing of roughly 1,000 yards between columns, adequate against one submarine firing from one bearing, left no room to recover when torpedoes came in from opposing bows within a span of single-digit minutes. Escorts, trained to screen a perimeter, faced a compressed interior. They could not patrol without abandoning the perimeter. The compressed interior. When Zero reported a hit and a secondary detonation on the second column's oiler, and immediately passed a fresh bearing to Grayback, the convoy's turnaway bled speed and cohesion. The kill zone radius widened, not because the submarines moved faster, but because the convoy's own evasive turns put fresh holes across preset torpedo tracks. An aerial reconnaissance photo taken 2 days later by a 7th Fleet patrol plane, the fourth witness object, shows a thin, slick, and drifting wreckage line south of It-Bayat. No burning, no survivors visible at the frame scale, just a diagonal stain across the monsoon chop. The photo caption ties no names to holes. It does not need to. The geometry, once seen, explains itself. By twilight, the group cleared the area rather than harvest stragglers. The control boat had spent command attention rather than torpedoes, keeping transmissions short and bearing calls crisp, trusting flank boats to solve their own fire control with minimal talk. That restraint preserved the pack's shape for the next seam farther north, at the Formosa Strait's southern gate, where traffic funneled again under weather and range limits. The decision was not about tallying ships, but about forcing an adjustment in imperial routing and escort duty cycles across an area larger than any single periscope could reach. The final word of the day belonged to a maintenance card signed in Pearl weeks earlier, the fifth witness object. A mark noting new SJ magnetron output tested to specification and a replacement HF antenna insulator fitted before departure. The pack's edge depended on such small, unglamorous certainties. Radar that held a contact in sea clutter. A voice set that did not arc to ground in salt spray. Torpedoes that ran at commanded depths after a year of bitter failures. Doctrine rides on parts. Imperial escorts, trained to peel off and prosecute a single assailant with depth charges patterned by sound bearings, now faced a choice they could not resolve. Stay with the convoy and leave a firing solution unchallenged, or chase a contact and open a lane for the unseen partner. The convoy commander's own rules ensured that either answer produced losses. The pack did not make the ocean smaller. It made the defenders' time shorter. It looked like an exceptional strike on a busy route in transitional weather. It was not. The authorization trail began at Pearl in late summer of 1943, with a short operations order that moved coordination from plotting rooms ashore to a designated commander at sea. Vice Admiral Charles Lockwood's initials sat at the bottom margin. Above them, 3 practical lines. Boats would sortie in 3s, 1 would control by voice, all would attack inside a shared fire plan. A week later, a logistics memo pushed spare SJ magnetrons, HF handsets, and wire-insulated antenna stanchions to forward bases at Midway and Fremantle. A production tally from the Mare Island shops, the first witness object of this act, lists completed radar overhauls against hull numbers, with a grease check by each line once the set showed solid contacts in sea clutter. What looked like a tactical experiment rested on unromantic parts moving on schedule. Doctrine followed parts. The plain English idea, taught in hurried pierside briefs, reduced to 4 verbs: find, fix, flood, finish. A lone submarine could find and finish, but often lost the convoy while working through a firing solution and reloading. 3 boats, each with a different angle on the same problem, could fix the geometry and flood the defender's decision loop. Reliability was never perfect. The Mark 18 electric torpedo, preferred for its wakeless run on night surface attacks, lagged the steam-driven Mark 14 in speed. The SJ sets could lose surface contacts in rain squalls and side-lobe ghosts. HF voice carried farther than planned on ducting nights. The system worked because it multiplied pressure faster than the escorts could split it, not because any single device was flawless. Case Study 1, the defense hold. Beshi Channel, late October 1943. The pack that opened Act 1 stayed on station along a seam between air coverage radii and monsoon lines, then held contact for a full tidal cycle rather than harvest the immediate wrecks. A decoded signal summary from Wolfpack, the second witness object, shows convoy assembly traffic from Mako to Takao running late by half a day, with an appended route change that hugged the west edge of the strait. The delay mattered. When the follow-on convoy pressed into the same weather and the same choke, the pack commander already had range tables laid out and an approach matrix chalked on the bridge combing. Escorts that had been trained to beat down a single attacker by depth charge pattern fell into a choice trap. Remain with the formation under radar shadow or bolt outward at each radar blip and open a lane. The measurable effect sits in the AAR pages of two boats. Salvo intervals trimmed to minutes, not hours. Gyro angles crossed from opposite bows. Convoy speed bled off by emergency turns until minimum steerage became the convoy's prison. The hold, not the first strike, produced the bigger dividend. Routes north into the Formosa Strait shifted within a fortnight, forcing longer hauls and escort gaps that other packs exploited. Case Study 2, the bottleneck twist. Formosa Strait, early November through December 1944, as the Imperial Navy tried to feed its fleet by moving fuel from the Indies to the home islands. Tanker convoys slid along the Chinese coast to stay under air umbrellas and inside visual land ranges. 3 boat groups waited where geography pinched. Off the Pescadores and the southern gate below Amoy, an aerial reconnaissance photo, the third witness object, fixed the pattern. Thin wakes threading between islands at dawn, columns tight, escorts stacked forward with their sonar lanes fouled by coastal reflections. In this terrain, the pack inverted roles. The control boat went deep and slow on the inshore side to anchor bearings. The flank boats ran night surface end-arounds offshore, using superior surface speed to get ahead and roll in against the lead columns. The metric that shows the doctrine's logic is convoy spacing. Columns set at about 1,000 yards to minimize exposure actually brought targets into mutual collision courses when simultaneous torpedo tracks forced contradictory turns. Escorts that tried to screen the inshore flank found themselves deaf inside their own baffles. Those that sprinted offshore lost the convoy to current and clutter. Those that sprang imperially, the adaptation, additional Kaiboken and a published zigzag plan, did not cure the physics of a narrow waterway and radar-equipped opponents. Case Study 3. The Doctrine Pivot. Tsushima Strait in the Sea of Japan, early summer of 1945. The pack idea met a mine belt and shallow margins. Operation Barney sent multiple groups through the strait under FM mine detection sonar, then loosed them at coastal convoys running coal and food to Honshu. A maintenance card from a forward base, the fourth witness object, lists emergency checks on the new frequency-modulated sets and notes hand-soldered fixes for saltwater intrusion. The tactic changed subtly. For saltwater intrusion, rather than converging on one convoy and shattering its cohesion, the boats distributed themselves along predictable night lanes and used brief voice bursts to pass speed gates and course lines. The measurable effect is not a single convoy tally but a tempo shift. Repeated night attacks at predictable choke hours forced civilian-manned escorts to run at battle stations through consecutive watches, racking up mechanical and crew fatigue. Japanese adaptation, hugging shoals, shifting to daylight under deteriorating air cover, and rationing escort fuel reduced exposure on paper but opened new seams. Fatigue and fuel scarcity are not tactical errors. They are the end state of a system under sustained pressure. Japanese countermeasures emerged quickly. Sustained pressure, radio discipline tightened. Convoy routing hugged coasts and island lee sides. New-build escorts with ahead-throwing weapons entered service. Air patrol arcs widened when fuel and serviceable aircraft allowed. Intelligence also learned. A stack of ferry and rail manifests seized post-war at Moji, the fifth witness object, shows deliberate staggering of departures to avoid predictable bunching in the straits. Yet the underperformance of these adaptations had caused the doctrine exploited. Radar parity was never achieved. Escort training pipelines shortened under wartime strain, producing crews less practiced at night surface intercepts against multiple high-speed contacts. practiced at night surface. Above all, fuel scarcity constrained the very sprints and wide sweeps escorts needed to police a three-axis threat. A convoy doctrine, built to shepherd slow freighters past single prowlers, could not scale to a geometry fight where every wrong chase created a different right shot for someone else. Mid-act, a contradiction forced refinement. HF/voice that enabled tight coordination also risked revealing a control boat's relative bearing on ducting nights, and more than one pack learned that Japanese operators could triangulate chatterbursts even if they could not decrypt content. In heavy rain, SJ scopes could ghost. In steep seas, voice sets arced to ground through wet insulation. Seas, voice Mark 18 torpedoes, while wakeless, were slower. End-around solutions that worked at one range failed when a target gained even a knot in a squall. The answer was procedural, not mystical. Shorter transmissions, pre-briefed approach matrices, and fire plans that assumed at least one malfunction per salvo. Packs shifted to whisper control, passing only bearing ticks and course marks, leaving the geometry to skippers who had memorized the matrix. The doctrine bent around its own limitations and, by bending, grew harder to disrupt. By spring of 1945, the rollout was complete enough that the pack concept no longer looked like a novelty. Portrayal through the ComSub-Pack and forward base diaries reads like any logistics program. Spare tubes counted, radar heads swapped, fuel loaded, crews briefed on the four verbs. What changed at sea was not just lethality but cadence. Convoy commanders who once planned around a single night of trial and a morning of respite now faced serial problems over successive tides. Doctrine lives and dies on time. The packs took time away. The immediate outcomes were measurable within weeks of the first Wolfpack strikes. By late autumn of 1943, oil convoys routed from Borneo and Palembang through the Luzon and Formosa Straits registered double-digit percentage losses per month, a rate unsustainable for a fleet dependent on imported fuel. Japanese convoy logs seized post-war at Moji record departures with fewer hauls and irregular spacing, a sign that losses were eroding the rhythm of tanker shuttles northward. A decoded message summary dated 9th of November, 1943, relayed to combined fleet staff, noted severe attrition in coastal convoy number 1075. Its escort commander reported that 2 tankers and 1 ammunition ship were lost to attacks from multiple enemy submarines coordinating by unseen means. The old assumption that convoys would face sequential lone attackers was no longer operative. By the first half of 1944, the operational ripple spread beyond the sea lanes. Imperial fleet planners began canceling scheduled sorties for carrier divisions, citing inadequate bunker oil. Scheduled sorties for one staff diary from the Kure Naval Arsenal lists ration orders that cut training sorties for air groups by half, an echo of how convoy losses translated directly into strategic immobility. On the American side, operational reports show packs tightening the noose across all main arteries: the Celebes Sea, the South China Sea, the Tsushima Strait. The shift meant submarines no longer measured success in isolated sinkings, but in pressure across the logistics grid. Convoys rerouted to avoid one choke point fell into another. The doctrine's effect was cumulative, not episodic. The ripple reached industrial and agricultural supply lines. Japanese rail manifests from Kyushu in early 1945, the second witness object of this act, showed declining inbound volumes of coal and rice. This act showed that coastal convoys that once carried raw materials north were shrinking, not by choice, but by attrition. Each ship destroyed was more than a hull. It was an irreplaceable transport asset. By spring, the Ministry of Transport acknowledged that the merchant fleet had fallen below 3 million gross tons, less than half its pre-war size. The Wolfpack campaign, though only a portion of the attrition, amplified every deficit by forcing convoys to sail in compressed routes and under predictable strain. Tactically, Japanese adaptations never closed the gap. Escort carriers and long-range patrol aircraft were too few and too late. Ahead, throwing weapons like the Type 95 projector entered service, but lacked numbers and trained crews to create an effective umbrella. But more telling was fuel scarcity. Kaibokan could not afford the sustained sprints and wide-arc sweeps required to challenge multiple attackers. Convoys sailed, but they did so slower, with thinner screens, and under mounting psychological pressure. A single-surfaced submarine on radar could scatter an escort line, as commanders could not be sure whether one hull meant 3 or more. This uncertainty, more than tonnage sunk, broke doctrine. The post-war legacy carried through 2 channels. First was the American Navy's internal codification. By 1946, training syllabi at New London incorporated Coordinated Attack Group doctrine as a baseline, not an experiment. Voice coordination drills, radar plotting under heavy sea clutter, and staggered attack matrices became permanent fixtures. Submarine warfare had shifted from solitary commerce raiding to cooperative disruption of logistics networks. Commerce raiding. Second was the wider Cold War implication. NATO navies translated the Wolfpack model into hunter-killer group doctrine, this time with surface escorts and aircraft coordinated against submarines. The principle endured. Coordinated pressure applied faster than a defender's cycle time creates outcomes disproportionate to individual strength. In Japan, the lesson remained in silence. Post-war maritime self-defense force documents, shaped under American oversight, emphasized anti-submarine warfare and convoy protection as existential missions. Training focused less on fleet actions and more on guarding lanes, an inversion of pre-war assumptions. The memory of tankers lost in the Luzon Strait, and freighters vanished in the Formosa narrow-shaped doctrine more than any battle fleet action. Logistics, once assumed secure behind escorts, became the first concern of any operational plan. A final witness object closes the circle. A faded aerial reconnaissance photo taken in August 1945, weeks after surrender, showing the straits off Takeo empty of wakes. The sea lanes that had once carried oil and ore under armed escort lay still. Onshore warehouses brimmed with unused mines and rusting kaiboken. The Wolfpacks had not only sunk ships, they had broken a rule that convoys once trusted, that numbers, formations, and escorts would suffice. When that rule fell, the Empire's lifeline drained away. And that rule fell on the quiet waters south of Yami Island, the same channel that first saw a pack converge. The monsoon crests rolled unchanged. Fishing outriggers returned, their wakes thin against the vast strait. The rule that had been broken never returned. The sea remembered only silence and the passage of storms.